fast fashion is killing the climate. Fast fashion accounts for 10% of global emissions. That means that if fast fashion as an industry was ranked in terms of countries, it would be third in terms of the countries that are generating emissions.
Personally, I've been very terrified of entering corporate. I've worked with various corporates in my career. There's a lot of bureaucracies. I think a lot of young people have these ideas, but they fail to get the buy-in from the higher ups. At the age of 27, assistant manager, chief of staff, and on top of that, leader of sustainability and youth advocacy at Deloitte. We're here with a good friend of mine named Ryan. How do we get to that point?
We've been arguing for years as a young generation, millennials and Gen Zs, that we want our voices to be heard. But what messaging are we putting out there, right?
We have a huge opportunity in the tech space to solve these issues.
There's no point in our voice just being us at stop oil protests, spray painting walls orange or tying ourselves to trees. We actually have to say, we understand the context with which you're making decisions, and we understand the stakeholder interest you're trying to protect. But there's another side to this. Why don't we come together and provide the solutions?
We're talking about issues that pertain to Africa. We're two white guys. Why should people listen to someone like you and someone like me? Cool. Episode 19, C.Cast. We're here with a good friend of mine named Ryan. We go way back to Kings. Another Kings person. Yeah, we're basically doing a reunion theme on the podcast, it seems. But yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here today, Ryan. So for you at home who might not know who Ryan is a young professional who has made some extremely broad steps in his industry. And I must say, at the age of 27, hey, because I know your birthday's in Jan, at the age of 27, assistant manager, chief of staff, and on top of that, leader of sustainability and youth advocacy at Deloitte. That's quite a title to hold at the age of 27. How do we get to that point? Like,
I mean, it's been a journey. It feels as though I've been at the firm, and it feels as though I've been in the industry for many years. I think that's also the nature of the industry. It's so fast-paced, you get exposed to so much. I've been supported by some incredible teams and some incredible leaders, and I think in order to progress in industry, you do need that. You do need to know that there's a lot of people who not just have your back, but are willing to take a gamble on you. And having said that, I don't know, there's a couple of titles there in terms of what my role is, and self-proclaimed youth leader, youth activist to a certain extent, but I've really managed to find my niche, and I've really managed to do something that a lot of people don't have the opportunity to do, which is align my passions with what I do on a day-to-day basis, which is absolutely incredible. I mean, it was a journey that I didn't know what direction I was actually going to go in, and I think a lot of the listeners of the podcast may also be exposed to that uncertainty when they're finding a career. I knew I did not want to be an entrepreneur, but I was always adamant that I wanted to change the world. I wanted to do something big, and you know, when you're young, you're driven by money, and I realized very early on that you do need to prioritize learning over earning. And sometimes you don't need to understand that your prime earning potential may happen in your late 30s, your mid-50s, regardless. So you need to find somewhere where you're satisfied and where you're able to actually enact or act upon your purpose and make a real difference. So I went from studying law in university. I got accepted to do my postgrad, and you know, I was fairly set on going the articles route and being an advocate just because everybody knew I loved to argue. And it didn't work out that way, because just as I was going to accept my conditional offer to do my postgraduate, I handed in an assignment to one of my law professors. And he called me in, and it was controversial, as I like to be. So it was sort of digesting a lot of the customs associated with black tax, and whether or not it's something that should be acceptable, something that should still exist today. And the prof called me in and said, listen, loved it, phenomenal, but you can't ask these questions. You can't be as controversial as this. People are going to have an issue with it in the industry.
Jeez.
And I was at that point like, okay, we're not going to be a good fit then for the industry, because I like to ask questions. And I like to think that it's our role as the youth to ask questions that people don't necessarily know the answers to yet.
Well, like, as you're talking about learning, and learning comes with asking questions. You have to ask questions in order to learn something new. So as you speak, I'm thinking about my childhood, and I think we have a lot of similarities. I think the biggest difference that we have is the entrepreneurship thing, because that's like when I graduated from varsity, I was like, you know what, I see this fork in the road. I'm going to take the less traveled path and see how that goes and take a risk. I think that's where my difference is. I'm a heavy risk taker. But where we're similar is that that process of being, a good student, right? And being a good learner. And I think back to my childhood, and I think I must have really frustrated my mom, because whenever she would ask me to do something, my first question would be like, why? Which is like, to some parents is like a bad thing. Like, don't question, just do, right? But for me, it was very difficult to do things without knowing the reason why I'm doing it, because I want to have purpose in what I'm doing. Once I understand the purpose, then it helps make the task that much easier. On this podcast, we really love to go back to how you got to where you are today, and then an outlook on the future. We often also really focus on topics around tech, entrepreneurship, and creativity. And what really interested me and really kind of pushed me towards bringing you on the podcast was the messaging that you're putting out on your social media around community, because community is so important. And when I look at your story, we come from a very similar community. We went to the same school. That's how we knew each other. And one thing that I remember about school times, well, there's two main things that I remember. The one is I remember coming to school very early in the morning and seeing Ryan on the field doing laps. And I look back at that and I'm like, that's where you and I think are also quite similar, is that level of discipline. And you had that at a very young age. And I think in order to be a successful person, you need to have that kind of discipline. I wanted for us to talk about that. Like, let's go back to, 2008, 2007 times. It's 6 a.m. in the morning at Robin Hills, and Ryan's doing laps on the field. Why? How does that happen? What is the purpose behind that?
It's a good question, and it's exactly what you speak of now, and it's discipline. So I'm somebody who, when I have a goal, I become hyper-focused on it. It's almost obsessive. And in many aspects, if you don't learn how to control that over time, it becomes a problem, and you do end up spiraling. But I think that if you look at anybody who's immensely successful, they have embraced the fact that there is no balance, even if it's just for a short period of their time, to achieve that goal. I think that balance in many aspects is this ethereal goal that a lot of us sort of work towards, and we want to find balance. We want to balance work and our social life and our families as well. But in order to reach the pinnacle, I'm a believer that you go through these peaks and troughs in your life where you actually have to become hyper-focused on achieving something. And I think that if I look back at my career thus far, and although it's in many extents still in its infancy, the reason why I've had these doors open for me and I've had these opportunities and the desire from individuals for me to get stuck into their team and be offered these leadership roles globally is because I'm very deliberate around what I want to achieve and where I want to be one day. I said the day that I joined the firm, and I still say it to this day, I want to be CEO of Deloitte Africa one day. And I firmly believe that that's something that I can achieve. And there's a quote that throughout the last couple of years has always resonated with me. And the quote is, never be afraid to ask yourself, how big would you dream if you knew your dream could not fail? And you have to become obsessed around the idea that whatever you set your mind to, you will accomplish. You may accomplish it in a different way. I mean, if you'd asked me 10 years ago what I wanted to do, I wanted to be a senior advocate. Now I'm saying, I'd love to be CEO. But beyond that, I want to change the world. I want to do something big. I want to be able to contribute in a meaningful way. And I think that element of discipline has to tie in with what your goals are.
100%. Discipline is a key ingredient for sure. And I think the trick to getting discipline right is having that sense of purpose and also having a clear vision of where you want to go. A lot of people, they don't think in that way. Like a lot of people, they want to have the nice car and the nice house, but they don't kind of think about, well, how do you get there? You don't just get there by, just, I don't know, whatever way. Yeah, like it doesn't just come to you. You have to go and fetch it. And the way that you go and get things of value in your life is you first need to offer value. And through offering value, you touched on it earlier, is you have to make yourself indispensable. Because once you've managed to make yourself indispensable, you start seeing these opportunities and people start realizing your value and putting you in the space for you to realize that value as well. And also touching on mentors, like mentors are key elements of that as well. I like what you're saying about having a vision and a belief, because right now in South Africa, we're heading up towards elections, and it's a little bit touch and go. We're not too sure what's going to happen. And with that uncertainty can come a lot of anxiety for people. And I think if you look back at the last 10 years and our generation, what's interesting to me is our parents, for example, they've kind of seen the ups and the downs of South Africa because they've been around for a while, For us, I mean, we're 27. Most of what we've experienced has kind of been a decline. There was a little bit of an incline that we experienced in South Africa specifically when we were born. But, we were young. We didn't realize or were able to pick up on these things. So most of our conscious life has been a kind of decline. And I think for young people, it's difficult to have hope because we've been on this decline. We haven't seen the upside.
Yeah.
And when there was an upside, it was back in the day when we were little kids and we didn't even realize it. So for young people watching this that feel hopeless and that can come onto this podcast and see this guy who's achieving these great things, where do you get that hope from? And this is why I was also bringing up the, doing laps on the field, because that's not an easy thing to do. And right now, with the current reality that we're facing, it's not an easy reality to face. But somehow you are able to pitch up every morning and consistently work hard at achieving a goal because you had a belief that you could achieve something. How, what message do you have for those people? Where did that come from? I want to break down the core of that so that people can take something away from that and have some level of hope towards a positive future in South Africa.
It's a good question. And I think at the core, what it comes down to is we need to, as a generation, be people that find solutions and not just problems. I think that for too long, we've not acknowledged the unconscious bias and the fact that we've been raised by a generation that's learned to be nitpicky, that's learned to find fault in everything. And we are starting to show that same association in the way that we go through our lives. I mean, how often do you see somebody targeting a specific political party, tearing them apart and saying, oh, they're doing this wrong, they're doing that wrong, rather than sitting down and saying, hey guys, we need to find a way to actually provide solutions where all stakeholders can come together and be happy. We've been arguing for years as a young generation, millennials and Gen Zs, that we want our voices to be heard. But what messaging are we putting out there, right? We can't, there's no point in our voice just being us at stop oil protests, spray painting walls orange or tying ourselves to trees. We actually have to say, we understand the context with which you're making decisions and we understand the stakeholder interest you're trying to protect. But there's another side to this. Why don't we come together and provide the solutions? I mean, we were in university during Fees Must Fall, for example. And the one thing, and there was a lot that I resonated with the movement, but the one thing that stuck with me was that there was a lot of complaining, but you had some of the brightest minds in the country that were sitting in rooms and no one was coming forward with solutions that would actually meet the objectives. And I think we have to be very deliberate around that. If we want our voices to be heard, we have to make sure that what we're saying is valuable. We have to become the generation that is a catalyst for innovation, that is a catalyst for making these big changes and really improving the current status quo. Because let's be honest, elections are coming up. A change of political party won't necessarily be a snap of our fingers and all of our problems are solved, right? We need to come together as communities, we need to come together as ecosystems and industries to actually start plugging the right solutions, to start improving the way we're doing businesses, improving the way we're looking out for livelihoods in that process. And I think that's really key in terms of the messaging.
Yeah. And what I like about what you're saying is there's a sense of responsibility. And, we want the big positions. One of the biggest complaints that we have as young people is that the people that are in control and that have power are from the older generation and they're not really sharing with us. But that, like you said now, in order to make that happen, you need to be able to offer value and offer solutions in the message that you're putting out there is the way you put it. So
we don't just need a voice at the table, we need a seat at that table.
Yes.
And then we need to demand a seat at that table, but ensure that when we're given that opportunity, we're taking full advantage and we're providing real insights.
And we're taking action. And I think from my side, I also see we're a social media generation. So a lot of the stuff that we do, is in the digital space. And that's where you start getting this idea of virtue signaling and raising awareness. And I think one thing that we're really good at as young people is raising awareness on issues because we have the tools to do that. We have the megaphone, which is Facebook or Instagram, and we have the skills to be able to record stuff and put it out there and have a voice in that sense. But that's only the first step. Being aware of a problem is the first step. the next more difficult part is now implementing action to kind of address that issue. And that's where we come into the picture as young people and what we need to be focusing on. So I think that's definitely something that's going to be important going forward, especially as young people. And just in the context of South Africa, you know, we have elections coming up. Your role is more focused around the continent. And I love that perspective because I believe that Africa has the potential to be a global superpower. And I think in order to get to that point, like going back in our previous conversations, we all need to have like a vision of where we want to go. And then once we can align on that, then we can start putting things into place to make us, or to just kind of start a pathway to get there. So when it comes to your role, right, you basically have, you essentially, or like, let me first ask you to explain your role to me.
Sure.
Just so I understand fully what that role is and what it entails.
Sure. So, and there's a few key roles that I have within the business and within the global construct outside of my day-to-day work, right? So wearing a couple of hats. The first role, which is the role that pays my bills, is as an assistant manager in the sustainability business. And I focus specifically on circularity and on sustainable and resilient supply chains. How do we build more resilient supply chains? How do we make sure that we're turning waste to fuel? It's not just going to landfill. How are we re-innovating products and value chains to make sure that we're reducing our overall footprint? I mean, we've consumed more virgin materials in the last 5 years as humanity than we consumed in the entire 20th century, which is astronomical, and it has to stop, right? Beyond that, I serve as the Africa Chair of Deloitte's Global Young Purpose Leaders Council. So that's something that has branched off of my involvement with One Young World, which is, for lack of a better word, the greatest global accelerator of youth activism on social and climate-related issues. We, upon becoming, or just prior to becoming an ambassador, I got to attend the One Young World Summit in Manchester, and I was blown away by incredible stories of youth that are making phenomenal changes in society, that are dedicating their entire lives to actually improving the well-being of other people that they've never met before. We got to meet scientists like Dr. Sylvia Earle speaking about hope zones in the oceans, and it was a transformative experience that actually is what caused me to pivot my life away from where I was currently working into the sustainability space. And as part of that role, I'm responsible for a few things. So the first one is to make sure that we're able to scale some excellent ideas that are being used globally to the African continent, which I think there's always value in, right? It's important in that, though, to understand the nuances that we face as Africa, right? And second to that role as one, and what I'm most excited about, is the opportunity to showcase what Africa and what Deloitte as Africa as a firm is doing that can change the world globally. I think that people don't understand the level of innovation that this continent is capable of. I mean, the way people rise above continually. So you look at some of the key challenges that we're seeing across Africa, right? The fact that we are the most disproportionately affected continent by climate change. Despite that, we see industries that are still continuing to grow and continuing to boom. We had a huge issue in countries like Ghana where the global west was dumping textile waste. And instead of just saying, okay, let's just send it to the landfills, the Ghanaian community found a way to resell this. Obviously, there's still some issues that come with it around what's sellable and what's not, but they create these entire economies that people really underestimate. I mean, there's an article that was floating around in one of the business papers this morning around a lady in one of the local townships who makes 80,000 Rand a month selling chicken. And I'm just like, my mind is blown to try and conceptualize that people, despite what their upbringings are, despite where they're located, what privilege they've been exposed to, they're able to really do something excellent. Like, if I look at some pockets of excellence, for example, in our local firm, we don't have polystyrene cups. We use ceramics. We wash them when we're done. We reuse them. If you go and chat to the people in America, they are so anti that. They all just want to use polystyrenes and single use. And trying to change that behavior is like a complete 180. Whereas for us, it's like, oh, that's easy.
It's just normal.
Exactly.
And it really speaks to that concept of creativity.
Yeah.
Because when we talk about creativity, a lot of people think, oh no, can I take a picture or can I draw a cat? Or like,
Yeah, exactly.
Creativity goes so much beyond that. It's about how you can take the constraints that you're operating in and maneuver it in a way that yields a result. And that process of like taking an idea and transferring it into reality, I believe that's what creativity is. And a lot of that is like the idea is the first point, but then beyond that, it starts to require action in order to bring it into reality, and persistence and consistency as well, which is really challenging. Quick thoughts. I don't have this in the notes here, but what are your thoughts on the situation with the Vodacom guy?
Oh, so there's different ways to frame this conversation, right? And I think they're likely going to take it to the Supreme Court of Appeal to get final judgments on what's being dealt. There's a few challenges in that if he had not had the role that he had and had exposure to the insights and information that he had whilst at his company, I don't believe that he would have been able to come up with a scalable solution like that. Likewise, I think that he is owed compensation just based off the fact that Vodacom profited immensely from what had actually happened. But I think that there's a little more conversation that has to happen in terms of finding a happy middle ground. I think that providing compensation that would equate to people having to lose their jobs across the business is not something that anybody wants to see. But I think that the initial offer of compensation was perhaps significantly lower than what was due. So I guess we'll have to see what happens in the Supreme Court of Appeal. I know that traditionally with these large-scale companies, whatever ideas you come up with while they are the intellectual property of that company. So
yeah, it is a bit tricky. I think the thing that worries me about that situation is the precedent it sets, because I think just based on the discussion that we're having, what's very clear is that the idea is one part of the process.
Yeah.
And the implementation is another. And generally from what I've seen is the implementation is actually the part that is a lot more difficult than just the idea. My question as well is whenever I debate with people about this on Twitter, I'm always asking them like, what about the people that implemented it? Shouldn't they get a portion of that billion?
Yeah, they're just doing their job, right?
Yeah, exactly. So where do we draw the line?
So this ties back to something that I think we as a firm do exceptionally well, and I know a couple of other countries do it well too. Where, and this is maybe speaking to the reason why I've actually stuck around for as long as I have, is you have the opportunity to build a business within a business, to become that intrapreneur, right? So slightly more risk averse to potentially being a full entrepreneur, but having the opportunity to take a concept, mature that concept, develop a go-to-market, and then be measured on the success of that in a long-term basis. I think that is transformative, and I think that companies should foster a culture where that is encouraged, because that's when the innovators can come out. So if you have a great idea, and I'll give you an example. So when I was part of Deloitte's Next Gen Advisory Council, which is essentially our millennial and Gen Z board that reports into the Africa executive, we had the task to embed sustainability as part of the organization. And as part of that, one of the ideas we came up with was a sustainability academy. An academy that everybody within the business would have access to free of charge, that would teach them first sustainability in their own personal capacity, how they can reduce their footprints. But broader than that, how does it apply to the work that you do? You've got accountants, you've got lawyers, you've got engineers, you've got how does it apply to your day-to-day life in terms of what's happening in the market? Do you need to learn more about circularity, green financing, green hydrogen? What does it touch on? And once we'd presented that and we had full buy-in from the executive, they took a bold step and said, okay, go and implement it, go and execute it. And there's a couple of awkward stares in the room, and you're like, wow, where am I going to find the time to do this? But the fact that somebody is taking a gamble and letting you actually follow your ideas through to execution is one of the greatest learning experiences that you could potentially have. And I think more companies need to take that approach to actually allowing people to build out their ideas, as opposed to saying, thanks for that.
Yeah, it's a very interesting concept that you're bringing up, because personally, I've been very terrified of entering corporates. And I think there's a lot of other people that might feel similar sentiments. And the reason why that's the case is because I've worked with various corporates in my career. And the one thing that I've identified is that there's a lot of bureaucracy. So I think a lot of young people have these ideas, but they fail to get the buy-in from the higher ups. Or they might not even believe that it's possible, so they don't even try and pitch it, right? And when that's the case, then we start to see this mediocrity come into play. And I think that's what we should be avoiding on all levels, whether you're an entrepreneur or if you're in a corporate. Mediocrity as Africans is not something we should be okay with or settle with. If we want to achieve this vision of uplifting our continent and becoming a global superpower, we cannot accept mediocrity on any level. And I think something that I've been afraid of when it comes to corporates is being in this corporate environment and just you have a certain task to push this paper and that's all that it is. So now for people that are in corporate, right? And this is largely why I went the entrepreneurship route, by the way. So for someone who's in corporate that has these ideas, that also has that sense of purpose to change the world and implement these ideas, how did you go about getting buy-in from the higher ups? Because that's a very tricky thing to do.
It is.
You might have the best idea, but if you cannot communicate it properly, it's pointless, it's valueless. So how did you achieve that? That's quite a phenomenal achievement.
No, a very good question. And I think, and earlier when I said, you need to have a seat at the table, you need to earn that seat at the table as well. So a lot of people get very frustrated because they end up in corporate and they think, I'm going to have the CEO on speed dial. And that's not how it works. There is a hierarchy within corporates. There is always going to be political red tape. And there's a reason why those governance measures are in place, right? The CEO can't spend all of his or her time listening to pitches from one of the analysts. You need to make sure that you have positioned yourself in such a way that your voice is respected and that your voice is heard. From the day that I arrived at the firm, I was suit and tie every single day because this is what the older generation like to see. And if I wanted to be taken seriously, this is what I was going to go by, whether it's most comfortable, whether you enjoy it. Sometimes there are formalities that you have to actually see through, right? Beyond that, I was not fazed about having to focus on doing a job, but doing it exceptionally well. Whether it was me putting together internal audit reports, whether it was me putting together risk frameworks, I didn't care. I was going to take it, learn about it, and become the best at it. And I think showing that level of discipline and attention to detail starts to get you noticed. I was privileged and blessed in the fact that our firm has this construct of the Next Gen Advisory Council where if you're passionate, if you've shown an attention to detail, if you have earned your seat, then you get an opportunity to sit on this Africa-wide council. And then you have direct one-on-ones with the executive. You engage in things like reverse mentoring, where you're paired with a member of the executive and you actually get to tell them how they can improve, which is mind-blowing, right? It's very progressive. But a lot of people in companies, and especially in some of your more traditional industries, the financial sector, for example, is a good one, they think that they can just go in there and rock the boat. You still have to earn your stripes. You can't go in and say, hey guys, we should have a 4-day work week when you don't understand what it means to work a 5-day work week. Because obviously all of your ideas are going to be met with a certain degree of animosity, especially from senior leaders who have spent 30, 40 years in the field. They're going to say, well, what does he know? He's still new. You need to show that I understand where you're coming from. I understand the business. I've proven myself as someone who's diligent, who's willing to make an impact. And there's an interesting thing where whenever you start in corporates, a lot of people would have heard it. Don't find out when to say no or learn when to say no. I want to throw that on its head. Don't say no. You don't limit yourself. Obviously, there's some instances where it's maybe physically not possible. I can't even count the number of all-nighters I've pulled because I said yes to some silly little task or project to help somebody else out. They remember that every single time. And I think that is testament to the fact that when you're under pressure, when you're faced with these challenges, you can still take on more and excel at it. So be willing to say yes.
I agree with you on that, eh? And I think especially as young people, we don't have much to lose at a young age.
Yeah.
That's the point where you should be taking risks and kind of stress test yourself to see what you're capable of. And you can only do that by taking on opportunities that you may never have taken on before or have no idea about. I think it is a bit scary doing that, but often those places of discomfort are where you are in a position of growth. And you need to have experienced that discomfort to experience the growth. And then also, like you said, earn your stripes. Would you say that in organizations, I mean, I believe this to be a universal law, but would you say that you kind of have to start with building trust? Yeah?
Definitely. Without a shadow of a doubt, trust is the foundation of every relationship. If you're going to tell that to your girlfriend, you might as well tell that to your boss, right? Because you're going to spend more time with your boss than your girlfriend, let's be frank. You have to make sure that there is that trust. You know that you can depend on them. You can raise challenges with them. You build that rapport. There's obviously an exception to every rule. Sometimes you genuinely have a conflict with someone and you struggle to communicate, you struggle to get along well, but it does work both ways because when you start to trust your leader, you allow them to take some decisions out of your hands and to follow diligently, then they will start to repay that trust in you, providing you with more opportunities, providing you with more experiences and saying, hey, this is outside of your wheel well, but I think you'd be great at it. They will start mentioning your name in the rooms that you aren't yet present in. And I think that counts for an immense amount.
Hey, hold on. I just need to remind you very quickly to like, share, and subscribe, and leave a comment down below about what you think about this episode. We need to be able to tell the algorithm on YouTube that we are creating content that is valuable. So please engage with this content, whether you're listening to it on YouTube or on Spotify or whatever platform, please engage. It just helps us reach more people, brings more people into the community, which means more access to knowledge and opportunities for you, a member of the community. So please don't forget to engage on this video or this audio podcast and leave a like, comment, or subscribe and give it a share. Thank you so much. We'll hop back into the episode. That's so true, hey? That's so true. And building that trust, there was a lot of... So the way that we work within JD Creations is when we bring on a certain project, sometimes we'll need to contract someone for a specific period of time to help out on that project. So I've worked with a lot of freelancers, especially in the creative space. One thing that I've identified in the creative space is that there's a lot of really talented people out there that skillfully can produce high quality results, but those aren't necessarily the ones who get all the jobs. And it's a bit confusing. Like, I also went through this when I first started, like through the video editing and stuff we produced. I was wondering, I feel like we edit better than these guys, but they're the ones that are doing the big jobs. How do I explain that discrepancy? Through my experience, what I realized was that it's not about the actual quality of the final product. It's about how you got there. So when you show up to the shoots, do you show up on time? When you are shooting, are you a pleasant person to be around? What kind of feelings do people have when they're on that set? When you deliver it, do you deliver it on time? Do you deliver it early? Do you go above and beyond? All of these things play a role in the decisions that people make. It's not necessarily about the final outcome or the final product. And it sounds so cliche, and we've spoken about this on other podcasts, especially with Bubele as well. It's more about the journey of how you get there. And I think the journey is very entwined to your attitude about the work that you're doing. If you have a positive attitude, if you are diligent, if you have that discipline, then that comes through in the work, and you also become easier to work with. People trust you, and when people trust you, they're going to give you more opportunities. So I think I've also kind of seen that's how I would translate it into our space. Yeah. So moving on, when it comes to, the global space, right? Something that we function a lot in is in the e-commerce space. And a lot of us are aware of Shine, whatever the heck you call it. And then there's also the new player in the game, Temu, whatever. So the reason why I wanted us to bring up this topic was around the sustainability conversation, because from our side of things, we look at digital and we see that as a solution to solving a lot of sustainability issues. Just to give you an example, instead of having a actual store where people come in person, people are going to have to drive to that store. People are going to work in that store, it's exactly, yeah. So, but also not on top of that, it's also a barrier to entry when it comes to the entrepreneurial space. So digital, because you don't need to have that brick and mortar physical location, you can sell things online from your home. It's a little bit more sustainable in the sense where you don't need to be transporting things as much. If you're working with people online, they don't need to hop in a car every day and come to the office. You can work online. There's certain sustainability elements that come into play there. Where I think we should take this conversation though, when it comes to Shein and Temu, is what is your thoughts about these companies being in the African market? Yeah. Do you think that there's space for African people or African companies to compete? And what kind of impact does it have on our country when we buy? Because a lot of the things that you talk about is consumer decision making. Yeah. So what are your thoughts around that?
Sure. So and there's a few important things to touch on. Right? Firstly, I will tell you unequivocally, and I'll even say it into the camera, fast fashion is killing the climate. It's killing the earth. Did you know, and maybe just to put it into perspective, that fast fashion accounts for 10% of global emissions? Sure. That means that if fast fashion as an industry was ranked in terms of countries, it would be third in terms of the countries that are generating emissions. It's immense. And it comes down to a lack of understanding in terms of what contributes to your emissions. So you touched on something interesting, which is that digital has lower emissions, but somebody's still driving, right? You still have the delivery vehicles that are delivering it to you. Mm. But beyond that, one of the challenges is the materials that are being used are really cheap. The materials are all petroleum derived. So they're derived from your crude oils. There are things like polyester, nylon, acrylics, which are non-recyclable. So the challenge with that is, firstly, I'm going to be a typical Karen. You get microplastics that wash off of those garments every time you put them in the washing. There was an interesting statistic that said we eat approximately 300 grams of microplastics a week in terms of the produce that we eat, because that gets filtered straight back into water systems and it doesn't biodegrade. So that's a challenge. Second to that, it's creating these textile dumps across Africa. So the global West has been very opportunistic in terms of how they've handled in fast fashion. And Shein and Temu are just two examples. There will probably be countless more, and there have been countless that have been before, right? So maybe it's not fair to focus just on them beyond their human rights violations. But what's happening is the global West is donating textiles to Africa, specifically East and sometimes West Africa, countries like Ethiopia, Ghana, and they're marketing these at wholesale prices when it's actually often unusable garments with holes, stains. It's their landfill that they're pushing out into the local markets. Now, I already spoke to you about the innovation around how they then sell these garments, or they try to. In a bag of about 100 units, they're able to sell maybe 7. And the rest get shipped straight to landfill. So another problem that we have across the African continent is that we actually don't have the capability to recycle these textiles. Many of them are not recyclable because of the dyes that are used, because of the different combinations of fabrics that are used as well. And I mean, it's hilarious because you think polyester, nylon, and acrylic, and everybody listening to this is going to go and have a look at their labels when they get home. But you get all these people that are in the morning at yoga getting their green smoothies, but their sportswear is all polyester. And then I think they're making a massive change to the world, but in actual fact, it's really being downplayed. So the one issue is the textile dumping. Massive landfills that are taking over countries. And in order to get rid of some of that land mass, it's just being burned. And that has a huge impact on the broader environment, but on the local markets as well. You don't want to be walking around in your filth. That's the first challenge. The second challenge is the impact that fast fashion has on our natural resources like water. So did you know that in order to create one pair of jeans, it takes about, and I'll do the conversion later, but 7,900 gallons of fresh water to make that pair of jeans. Now, considering that we are most likely going to have the next world war over fresh water sources, we're on a continent that is deprived of access to fresh water. That's a huge, huge, huge challenge. The reason why people have still embraced it is because when we think about Maslow's hierarchy, we as an African continent have more pressing issues than where we're buying our clothes from. And I've always used this as an example, and this is what I love to communicate on the global stage, is that if I'm worried about putting food on the table, I'm worried about there being food on the table. I'm not worried about if it's sustainably sourced, if it's organic, because it's going to cost me more. When I'm shopping around, I'm looking at the aisles and I'm going for the cheapest because I need to provide for my family. And what's happening is, because of our increased cost of living and because of our decreased standard of living, to be honest with you, a lot of people from our generation are saying, hey, I still want to be trendy. I want to follow, again, you mentioned it earlier, right? It was like virtue signaling. It works both ways. I want to be just as trendy as this latest influencer. I'm going to buy all the stuff from Shein, or I'm going to buy all the stuff from Temu, or hey guys, it's only 20 Rand. Let me buy this random stuff off of Temu and see if it's fun. And it's creating a larger issue than we actually know how to deal with. It's also, as maybe a final point on this, it's crippling local economies. So we are too far removed from the issues to actually understand the impact that it's having. South Africa, the Western Cape being a big proponent of it, used to have a thriving textile sector. And across Africa, you think about traditional dress, it is incredible. So we had this thriving textile sector that now all of a sudden can't compete on a cost basis because they're outsourcing where there are loose labor laws with cheap like input materials as opposed to cottons. It's a tenth of the price of locally manufactured garments. So all your large-scale manufacturers who are trying to keep up with the trends, are trying to make sure that you've got the latest styles that are on the racks, they're all saying, let's just rather import it than supporting local. You're leaving so many people unemployed who then continue in this vicious cycle. And then you start going to these little mom and pop shop like pop-ups, and you see the value of like an organic cotton shirt. Unreal. You're like, okay, cool, let me just go to like this place and buy a cheap one quickly. And it's exacerbating the problem that already exists. And sadly, in places like Accra and in Ghana, where there's this influx of textile waste, of imported textiles, there is no longer an appetite to create traditional clothing. It is now one of the most expensive items of clothing to go and buy if you'd like to wear your traditional clothing for an event. And I think that is taking away from the uniqueness and from the beauty of Africa and African cultures.
Yeah, I think it's a very big problem, and there's the economic side of it as well. You know, being someone who studied economics, always think of it from that lens. And like you mentioned, the average person doesn't care what they're wearing. It's just we're very price sensitive in South Africa, meaning that if there's a small increase in price, it can influence our decisions very drastically. And yeah, these international companies have become very competitive in the space because we can't produce at the same quality or that's at the same price in South Africa. I do think there's a potential solution to this that I want to bring your way so you can either critique or agree on. I'm keen to hear your thoughts. So what my thoughts are, that is, we have a huge opportunity in the tech space to solve these issues, right? So the main issue that we have is that we don't generate a large disposable income as young people in South Africa and Africa, right? And because we don't generate a large amount of money through our jobs, and a lot of people are struggling to find jobs in the first place, we have to make decisions when it comes to clothing and buy the cheapest possible clothing. And I think people should also be able to express themselves, right? I don't think what you're saying is like, no, you can't be trendy or you can't be, you know, this is more important. You know, that's also important to people. So how do we navigate that? So for me, the solution is really to create jobs and to also increase the amounts of income that we're able to generate as young people. And I think largely entrepreneurship plays a huge role in that. People starting businesses and finding gaps, filling those gaps, and then obviously generating money for themselves. But I think where the true opportunity lies is in the digital space, because we've got the largest youth demographic in the world. And we've also starting to see that infrastructure is becoming more widely available in South Africa when it comes to accessing the internet and accessing devices. I think that creates a huge opportunity for us to sell services, digital services, to international companies, because if they're going to export those services to South Africa, that means that they're going to be paying more affordable prices. And if we're able to deliver at the same level, even better, which I think we have the potential to do. One of the things that makes South Africans and Africans different is our creativity and our culture. Like you said it earlier, because we function in these limitations, we have to figure out creative ways to solve problems. People value that overseas. When you're brought up in an environment where you don't have many limitations, you start to see mediocrity. We have to adapt and evolve. And in this world that is constantly changing and evolving, we kind of have the skill to adapt and evolve because of the environment we come from. So I think that's extremely valuable to these international companies. So what I would really love to see is young people in South Africa and Africa getting access to, you know, technology and online and skills, and developing those skills and providing services to international companies. Those companies will remunerate them. That gives us more disposable income to start having a little bit more power in the decisions that we make. What do you think about that? Do you think that's a potential solution to that, or is it broader?
I think that's one of the potential solutions, right? And I think I say that just because there's no one solution that's going to solve everything. I think there will be immense success with that. And I think that with the world, I mean, we're past the fourth industrial revolution. We're into this new era of Gen AI. We're into this new area of full digitalization. I think that it's hugely important for us as a continent and for us as a youth to take advantage of that. I think in order to get that right, two things need to happen. Number one, we mustn't short sell ourselves. So granted, yes, we want the global companies to use us. We must show why they should. We should have the technical competency beyond what's expected of us. We should have the innovations beyond what's anybody else globally is capable of. I think that's massive. We don't want to become this sweatshop of digitization for the global West to just pull upon as and when needs be, right? I think linked to that, and maybe an opportunity to get the global international funding organizations involved, is we need to first bridge the gap in terms of digitalization across the continent. I think that the pandemic showed us that there is a massive tech divide, and it exacerbated that tech divide in many extents, right? So not just across income groups, but specifically across gender. I think that the fact that we are now in 2024 and we're still having to talk about the fact that women are underrepresented in STEM is a massive issue and something that we need to address. We need to ensure that if we are going to become the hub for the fifth industrial revolution, if you will, we are providing the same level of access and quality of education as it relates to all forms of digitalization across all income groups, across all regions, and across both genders, right? To make sure that people really have that platform to build upon and to make innovations. I mean, when I was with One Young World, I got to meet Dora Palfi, and she created a coding application specifically for young girls, but for anybody that's quite young, to learn about coding and to be able to do it just on a simple smartphone. And I was like, wow, this is a phenomenal opportunity, phenomenal idea. Then I started running the numbers in the local market, and I was like, you would be shocked to know how many people, even within a 10-kilometer square radius of where we are right now, don't have a smartphone, don't have a laptop, don't have easy access to any of those, don't have a data connection that they can use. And I think that policy has to be improved. I think that whatever political innovations or political changes we're going to see coming in the next few months need to be focused at addressing that at its root. I think that's something that former President Nelson Mandela was very big about, is that education is the key, right? And I think that that's something that we've neglected along the journey. But I love the idea, and I think it's a great start to actually building a footprint as the African continent.
Thank you for that, Ryan. I think when I agree with you on policy, 100%, I think what we've learned over the last 10, 15 years is we can't rely on that. So there is a hope, obviously. You know, the great thing about elections is they bring us an opportunity to create change. So there is a hope that that will change, but I don't think we should rely on that change based off of our experience.
Exactly. So don't get me wrong, we can do it ourselves. And this is something that I'm still shocked that a lot of companies haven't started to do it. But what is preventing us from actually transferring those skills ourselves? You don't have to donate millions to building a school or to developing mobile computer labs or whatever. If we connect the right role players in industry, if we become these ecosystem integrators that are painting by numbers and putting 1 with 2 and 2 with 3, then all of a sudden we can be approaching the telcos to say, let's grant zero rate data for set applications. We're going to big companies, firms like ours, where we're saying, okay, at the end of life of your laptops, you write them off. Some of you take them straight to landfill, which is inexcusable. Some of you just decide to have like a staff discount sale. Some of you like donate them to a random home. Why don't we become more deliberate? Why don't we connect the telcos with the big companies that are writing off their devices, with some of your logistics companies? Why don't we set up mobile computer labs? Why don't we provide individuals with the opportunity within the construct of their job to take 40 hours a year, the same as what Deloitte embraces, and say, for 40 hours a year, you don't have to take time off. You're going to go and you're going to transfer some skills. You're going to upskill people. I think that, like you said, let's stop relying on other people to make the changes. We need to actually take it by the scruff and say, we're going to innovate, we're going to figure it out, we're going to pull the right names into the conversation and get it done. Because there's no plan B, right? And this is something I'm big about on youth advocacy. And everyone's like, oh, what happens if the earth does warm by 2 degrees or whatever? And I say, it's not. It's not going to. We're going to stop it. We're going to change it, because we have to. If we don't, then the naysayers aren't going to be around either to tell us, haha, told you so. So we actually have to make it happen for ourselves.
Yeah. I love the passion behind what you're saying, and I see there's a huge opportunity to tap into, especially with small businesses. So in the context of what we do, like I mentioned, we contract people for certain roles and responsibilities. Now, a lot of the people, since we're a small business, we don't have the capacity to pay someone a full salary.
Yeah.
So what we do is we contract the person, and sometimes the person may not have the skills fully to do the job. Maybe there's like little gaps that need to be filled. And that's where we will spend time. I mean, Pearl's sitting behind the camera here. She's also been a part of this. But when Pearl started within JD Creation, she didn't have all of the skills to do everything that she does today. And what happened was we sat together and we worked together, and I was able to transfer a lot of the experience and lessons that I've learned through my experience. And now Pearl sitting with us today is now able to run this whole setup that we're using today on the back end. So there's a transfer of skills there, and that wouldn't have been possible if the small business didn't exist and we didn't have clients paying us to do that. Because through paying us, you keep the lights on, and then that gives us the ability to, not just for me to teach Pearl, but for Pearl to teach someone else as the business grows. So I think it's important for us as small businesses to focus on that purpose. And also, when we're working with clients, we need to communicate that that's a part of our values. That's a part of our intention with the business. You're not just investing in a service that we're providing to you. You're investing in more than that. You're investing in someone learning a skill that's going to contribute towards the economy, that's going to uplift their economy. And this message goes out to anyone who's abroad, and specifically South Africans abroad. Where at the beginning of this year, we made a decision that we don't want to be servicing just South African companies. We want to be servicing companies abroad, and specifically companies that have some level of affiliation with South Africa. Because by servicing those countries abroad, them using us as a service provider is investing back into our country. And I think we need to have a cultural shift in that sense, because there's a lot of people abroad that don't want to necessarily be abroad, that are just living there because of safety concerns, and rightly so. That's understandable. But if we want to see South Africa be uplifted, if we wanted to create it as a safe space and create an economy in South Africa that's a lot more higher standard of living, where we don't have to be looking over our shoulders, locking our cars, worrying about crime. If we want to see that, we need to invest back into the country, and it is possible. So I love that idea. And I think that there's huge opportunities for big businesses to support small businesses in that. And I think if we can do that, that can have a huge impact.
Massive.
So, Ryan, when it comes to the future, right? Because we've touched a little bit on your past, we've spoken a little bit about what you're doing now. I want to talk about this community element that you are developing, right? Because this kind of change that you're talking about now, we're talking about high-level mass change, right? That doesn't happen with just Josh and Ryan.
Exactly.
It happens with a lot more people that have a shared interest and have a shared drive to make that become a reality. So tell me a little bit more about this community that you're building. And I'm also going to be a little bit selfish in this, because you've given me a lot of advice in terms of appealing to the higher ups in corporate companies, and I appreciate that. But I think you've also got a trough of knowledge when it comes to building a community. And that's something that we're doing here as well. So what has your experience been like building that community?
Sure. So one thing that I must say is that I may not be the person who changes the world, but I will make it my life mission to try and touch the life of the person who will, or to try and uplift the person who might. If we're sitting and we are, like you say, coming together as a community and acknowledging the fact that Josh and Ryan don't have all the solutions to save the world, but somebody in that room might. There might be that little catalyst that just ignites the flame in all of us, and all of a sudden we're able to solve the world's problems. So that maybe is just an initial signal on the importance of that community, right? What I have learned in terms of scaling your initiatives and scaling your ideas is that you need to first make sure that you are engaging within organizations in the community or individuals in the community that have values that align to your own. Because it's easier to trust, tying back to that conversation. But beyond that, you know that someone or a business is as passionate about making an impact as you are. And don't play your cards close to your chest. There is an important time where you realize you actually have to be vulnerable and say, listen, this is what we want to do. So in the work that we do, I mean, closely aligned with sustainability commitments and closely aligned with building circularity across the continent, there's times where we say, you know what, we're going to not make any money from this, but we're going to work with you on finding a solution that will touch more lives than we could have ever imagined by ourselves. And I think that's quite important. When you're building a community of people, organizations, or businesses, you need to be quite deliberate across that value chain. So, for example, when we wanted to understand more about extended producer responsibility in South Africa, which basically is legislation that makes companies pay for whatever their waste packaging products are off the back of their imports into the country, and follows this journey. That legislation goes all the way down to informal pickers who are on the side of the road with their trolleys, surfing down the road. And we actually went to the people that were sorting the waste, and we had conversations. We found out, hey guys, you're at the end of the value chain. What's your experience like? What value do you have? What insights do you have? And you start walking along all the aspects of the value chain for whatever solution you're trying to solve. And you realize, okay, now I know what this person needs to solve for. I know what this company needs to solve for. There's actually so much synergy if I bring them together, and then they are solving one another's challenges. So, I mean, for example, there was a big global funding organization that wanted to make sure they're addressing equality in the informal sector, right? And it's so easy to plug them with a contact for someone in the local producer responsibility organization sector who is at a grassroots level making sure that they're employing females in the informal recycling sector, but female-led businesses too. And understanding those trade-offs is so important. So whenever you're pitching to a client, a partner, whatever it is, all the way up to like your C-suites of your blue chip companies, understand what their problems are, understand what their priorities are, and understand how you can come together to address some of their problems, to help drive towards their priorities, and to collaborate on an objective that will ultimately see the growth of both organizations or the growth of what you're trying to accomplish. I think that's...
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Collaboration is definitely key to realizing that. And I think we have a culture of competition, but when we flip it on its head and start viewing us building a bigger pie rather than fighting over a bigger slice, that is beneficial for all of us, and that's going to create sustained growth. So we are approaching the end of the podcast. I've got a few questions for you. Favorite sneaker brand?
Oh, gonna get controversial here. So favorite sneaker brands got to be Adidas, primarily because not just the collaborations, but because they've embraced recyclables, specifically through their Parley offshoot, where they're recycling ocean plastic. Nike has started to do the same through their Nike Grind, where they're starting to really recycle a lot of their cut-off textiles into existing soles. So I think that's a good one for me. I'm big into my Jordan 1s, big into my Yeezys. So I've got a less sustainable collection than I should have, but they stay in the collection, so at least they're not ending up in a landfill.
Cool. If Puzzles is Ryan's dog, by the way, could talk, what would be his first sentence?
Let's play ball. Without a doubt. Obsessed.
One tech innovation you wish existed now?
One tech innovation that I wish existed now. In the African construct, autonomous driving, fully autonomous driving, I think it would free up a lot of time for us. I think it would lead to a lot fewer accidents. Globally, I guess it's difficult to conceptualize what hasn't yet been created, but I certainly like the idea of augmented reality in the workplace, and I like the idea of being able to have an in-person experience without having to actually commute.
Last question. We're talking about issues that pertain to Africa. We're two white guys. Why should people listen to someone like you and someone like me?
Such a good question, and I had a good chuckle with it with some of my mentees that I have. Like, why is this one random white dude being asked to share perspectives on Africa? And I think it's important to understand the role that we have in terms of representing the African voice. And the keyword there is representing. We need to be truly representative. You have tons of African males who aren't representative of African male voices. You need to make sure that we're constantly in touch with what is happening. There's not a day that goes by that I'm not meeting with somebody at a junior level or a senior level across East Africa, West Africa, Central Africa, or Southern Africa, to try and understand what their experience is, even if it's not a shared experience that we may have, but appreciate where they're coming from and appreciate the concerns that they raised. Once we embody that representative stance, then we're able to actually act as a representative leader or a representative voice. I think what's also very key, and something that I've learned in the positions that I've held as well thus far, is we need to, when we are being a representative voice, understand that the people don't work for us. We work for them. We are evaluated directly on how well we bring forward their concerns and their experiences and their innovations. And I think when you remember that and when you approach a role as a leader or as a representative with that mindset, you're going to see everything start to transform for you. And people are definitely going to look beyond just your common experience and look at you as somebody who is embodying the views of thousands of other people.
Ryan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been epic. I loved it.
That's episode 19 of the C.Cast. Thank you so much for watching this latest episode of the C.Cast. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe. We're trying to achieve a huge mission and we need you to invest in it. The best way to do that is by liking, sharing, and subscribing and leaving a comment down below. By doing that, you help the algorithm understand that we are offering content that is valuable and it will reach more people. There might also be someone out there that just wants to learn a lesson or who might be able to take something away from the podcast. Share it with them. And lastly, if you'd like to be more involved in the community, if you want access to opportunities, knowledge from our experience in the digital marketing space, or to connect with other people who are like-minded and uplifting the continent, starting businesses and using tech and creativity to make them successful, join the WhatsApp group by scanning the QR code, and we'll chat with you there. Until then, bye.